If you touch my car one more time, you're going to regret it. The words barely left my mouth when I heard that metallic crunch from across the driveway, the echo bouncing off the brick walls and the freshly mowed lawns of our quiet suburban street. Before we start the story, leave a comment telling us where you are watching from, and at the end don't forget to rate the story from 0 to 10, enjoy the story. The morning sun was just hitting the edges of the maple trees, casting long shadows over the gravel, and I could smell the faint tang of gasoline mixed with the wet scent of dew on the asphalt. I slid my hands over the hood of my 1967 Camaro SS, feeling the cool chrome under my fingers, every curve polished to perfection after months of sanding, priming, and wet sanding, the orange paint reflecting the first rays like molten copper. That car wasn't just a vehicle, it was every Saturday morning, every long hour in the garage, every late night of listening to the hum of the electric sander while coffee cooled on the workbench. I turned slowly and saw Patty Caldwell, the HOA president, behind the wheel of her white SUV, her grin tight, the kind that froze the air around her as she rolled the vehicle forward, nudging the edge of my front bumper. Her perfectly manicured nails gripped the steering wheel while the morning breeze carried the scent of her floral perfume, sharp and sweet at the same time. I could hear the faint vibration of the engine, the tires crunching over the small stones of the driveway, the scrape of metal meeting metal that made my stomach twist. It had been happening for the third time this week, and each time left a new scratch, a new dent, a fresh layer of rage settling in my chest like hot iron. My neighbor's lawn sprinklers hissed in the background, sending arcs of water across the yard, the droplets catching the sunlight and flickering like tiny prisms over the hood of my Camaro. I bent down, checking the alignment of the front wheel, my hands sticky with a mix of motor oil and sweat, tasting the sharp tang of metal dust in the air. I could feel the vibrations in the concrete under my boots, hear the distant birds scolding each other from the oak tree at the corner, and through all of it, I noticed Patty's eyes, cold and calculating, scanning for some hint of hesitation, some sign that I would step back. But I didn't. I never did. My name is Ethan Harper, 38, a mechanical engineer and a man who spent the better part of the last year restoring this car from a rust bucket to a gleaming symbol of precision and patience. Every bolt, every gasket, every drop of sweat had been logged in a binder thicker than a phone book, my own personal ledger of pride and perseverance. The aroma of fresh primer lingered in the garage behind me, mixed with the sharp scent of cut grass and warm asphalt, grounding me in the reality that this wasn't just about a car, it was about respect, property, and the unspoken rules of who controlled what in this little corner of the world. I clenched my fists, the muscles in my forearms tensing, feeling the pulse of adrenaline like electricity up my arms, and I knew that today was going to be different. Today, Patty wasn't just testing my patience, she was walking straight into a trap I had been planning in my head for weeks. Every creak of the garage door, every metallic clang, every scent of oil and asphalt had been memorized, catalogued, and was now a tool I could use. I stepped back, the sunlight hitting the Camaro just right, glinting off the chrome and making the scratches Patty had left almost glow like markers on a canvas, reminding me of every slight, every violation, every audacious move she had made. The neighborhood was still waking up, the hum of the distant freeway, the occasional bark of a dog, the soft rustle of leaves all underscored the tension in the air. I breathed in, the metallic tang of determination filling my lungs, the familiar smell of gasoline anchoring me, and I whispered again, more to myself than to her, "You have no idea what's coming." And in that moment, standing in the gravel driveway, feeling the weight of months of careful planning in my hands and the history of every part of that car beneath them, I realized that this morning would mark the beginning of the end of Patty Caldwell's little suburban reign. The Camaro had been more than just a machine to me. It was a chronicle of patience, precision, and countless weekends spent in a small garage with the scent of fresh primer hanging in the air. I could still feel the texture of the leather gloves I wore while polishing the chrome, the subtle vibration of the orbital sander in my palms, and the quiet satisfaction of seeing each bolt tighten just right. This car carried the memory of late nights with the radio low, the faint hum of neon lights filtering through the garage window, and the smell of oil mixing with sawdust from small home repairs. My house on Willow Creek Lane was modest, a single story with white siding and a brick chimney, but it had become the anchor for my small world of precision work and quiet routines. Every morning, I would step out onto the gravel driveway, feeling the crunch under my boots, listening to the subtle song of the neighborhood waking up around me. The oak tree at the corner of the property stood as a silent sentinel, its branches swaying lightly in the breeze, casting patterns across the grass that I had mowed meticulously the day before. My workshop smelled of metal filings, lubricants, and the faint trace of coffee left to cool on the bench. It was my sanctuary and my proving ground. Across the street, the faint outline of Patty Caldwell's house, her perfectly landscaped front lawn gleaming in the sunlight, served as a constant reminder of the subtle tensions that had built over months of neighborhood conflicts. She moved with an air of self-importance, every step measured, her polished nails and the crisp lines of her white SUV contrasting sharply with the informal, lived-in look of my property. I could hear the occasional echo of her voice through the morning air, clipped and precise, barking orders or complaints that often seemed to drift harmlessly into the distance but left a lingering weight of irritation. I spent that morning walking slowly along the edge of my driveway, checking the alignment of the Camaro one more time, noting how the sunlight played off the curves of the fenders and the hood, and how each detail mattered, not just to the car but to the sense of order and accomplishment I had built around it. I ran my hands along the smooth metal surfaces, feeling the faint warmth from the sun and the subtle vibrations beneath my fingers, thinking about every painstaking step it took to bring the car back to life. In the garage, the tools were arranged in their familiar places, the smell of metal and grease mingling with the faint hint of varnished wood from the cabinets, grounding me in a reality that felt stable despite the recurring disruptions. I thought about my neighbors, the quiet rituals of their mornings, the mailboxes glinting in the sun, the soft chatter from the kids walking to the school bus, and how this little pocket of the world had its rhythm, one that Patty often tried to disrupt but that I had learned to navigate with care and precision. As I prepared a fresh rag to wipe down the Camaro for the final inspection before heading out, I could hear the distant hum of a lawn mower and the faint whir of a garage door across the street, blending into the ambient soundtrack of the neighborhood, a mix of mechanical motion and nature. It was in these small, deliberate movements, the careful attention to detail, and the cultivation of my personal space that I found my center, my patience, and the understanding that every action had its consequence, even in the subtle ecosystem of suburban life where a single misstep could ripple across the block. I paused, inhaling the mingled scents of asphalt, oil, and cut grass, feeling the warmth of the early sun on my back, and I knew that the next hours would be a test not just of skill but of resolve, observation, and the quiet application of intelligence honed over years of dedication to craft and care. Patty Caldwell had perfected the art of disruption, her every move precise, calculated, and accompanied by the faint hum of her SUV engine. I watched from the edge of my driveway, the gravel crunching under my boots, as she navigated toward the edge of my Camaro once again, her expression unreadable, her eyes hidden behind the reflective lenses of her sunglasses. I could feel the warmth of the morning sun on my shoulders, the slight breeze carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and the distant aroma of coffee from a neighbor's kitchen, grounding me in the reality of the quiet suburban rhythm that I had carefully cultivated around my home. The Camaro gleamed under the sun, every curve and line a testament to months of attention to detail, sanding, and polishing, each reflection in the paint a subtle reminder of the hours invested. I crouched slightly, adjusting the angle of my view, noticing the way the light caught the chrome on the front bumper, highlighting the meticulous work I had done, the subtle imperfections from previous incidents standing out like markers on a map. Patty rolled the SUV forward just enough to nudge the corner of the car, the scrape sounding metallic and sharp, echoing off the garage walls and blending with the distant call of a crow from the old oak tree. My hands tingled with awareness, my body attuned to every sound, every movement, every shift in the air. I had been documenting each incident, noting times, positions, angles, and the subtle patterns of her behavior, recognizing that predictability would be the key to my response. Across the street, the sidewalks were empty, the neighborhood in its early morning lull, the occasional flicker of movement from a passing jogger or a dog walker serving as background rhythm. I traced my fingers along the smooth hood of the Camaro, feeling the subtle ridges of the paint and the warmth of the metal beneath, imagining the path the SUV would take if she repeated her actions as she had before. The driveway sloped slightly, the gravel shifting under small pressures, and I considered how each detail, from tire traction to sun reflection, could inform the timing and positioning of my next steps. In the garage, the scent of motor oil lingered alongside the faint tang of burnt rubber from a previous repair, reminding me of the hands-on work that had gone into restoring the vehicle. Every tool was in its place, the bench organized with precision, each socket and wrench a silent partner in the process I had mastered. I stepped back, letting the sun glint across the Camaro's surface, catching the scratches from prior incidents and turning them into a visual record of resilience, evidence of patience. And the methodical care that had kept me prepared. I watched Patty from the corner of my eye, noting the shift in her posture, the subtle tightening of her jaw, the way her foot moved slightly on the accelerator, each micro-movement providing insight into her intentions. The air felt electric, charged with anticipation, carrying the mingled scents of asphalt, oil, and the faint sweetness of the spring morning. My mind ran through possibilities, each more calculated than the last, testing scenarios and outcomes, until I had a clear path forward, a plan that would use observation, timing, and the environment itself to transform her repeated aggression into a self-revealing mistake. I inhaled slowly, feeling the cool morning air fill my lungs, the warmth of the sun balancing the crispness, and knew that every subtle cue, every sound, every reflection would come into play. I was ready to move, to turn the tables, and to do so in a way that was measured, deliberate, and undeniable, ensuring that the next moment would not just be a reaction but a statement of skill, patience, and carefully applied strategy in the quiet choreography of suburban life. Patty Caldwell stepped out of her SUV, the morning sun catching the reflective lenses of her sunglasses and bouncing off the white paint of her vehicle, making it almost glow against the backdrop of perfectly trimmed hedges and freshly mowed lawns. I observed her every move, noting the rhythm of her steps across the gravel, the faint scent of her floral perfume mixing with the crisp air, and the subtle creak of her leather shoes as they compressed the stones beneath them. She paused at the edge of my driveway, glancing back toward her house as if to confirm she had an audience or to ensure no one would intervene, and I could see the slight tension in her shoulders, the deliberate control in the way she held the steering wheel, as though the car itself were an extension of her authority. The Camaro gleamed under the sun, its polished hood reflecting the long shadows of the surrounding oaks, and the metallic tang of motor oil and asphalt filled my senses, grounding me in the sensory reality of the morning. I ran my fingers over the fender, feeling the subtle warmth of the metal and the smooth curvature of the restoration, and I thought about every hour spent aligning panels, tightening bolts, and sanding the primer until it was perfect, every moment contributing to the meticulous pride that now made Patty's movements across the driveway all the more audacious. The neighborhood was waking slowly, a lawn mower hummed in the distance, a dog barked faintly, and the rustle of leaves from the oak trees overhead created a soft ambient soundtrack to the tension in the air. Patty took another step forward, and I could see her calculating every angle, her eyes scanning for gaps in attention, for the slightest sign that I would flinch or hesitate. I remained still, feeling the gravel shift beneath my boots, the sunlight warming my back, and the faint buzz of electricity from the garage tools resting nearby reminding me of the careful planning that had gone into this space. I knew every foot of the driveway, every subtle incline and decline, every spot where the tires could grip or slide, and I kept a mental map of it all as I watched Patty inch closer. The distant hum of a passing car on the street, the subtle whisper of wine through the trees, and the faint smell of damp earth after last night's rain all combined to create a precise sensory environment, one I could read and respond to. Patty's hands adjusted on the steering wheel, the small creases in her fingers catching the light, and I noted her posture, the way her weight shifted slightly with every movement, giving away small tells of intention. My own hands were steady, my breathing controlled, and I felt the calm focus of someone who had prepared for this moment thoroughly, the culmination of patience, observation, and careful recording of past incidents. Every detail mattered, the way sunlight reflected off the hood, the shifting sound of gravel underfoot, the smell of motor oil and grass, all feeding into the calculation of what would come next. I held my position, eyes locked on Patty, ready to move only when the timing was perfect, knowing that each subtle motion could be leveraged, that each environmental cue could be turned into advantage, and that the next moments would set the stage for a response that was deliberate, measured, and precise, transforming the morning into a quiet but undeniable demonstration of planning and observation in the world I had built around my car and my home. The scrape of the SUV against the Camaro had left a faint metallic scent lingering in the air, sharp and precise, intertwining with the warm aroma of fresh asphalt and the faint sweetness of spring blossoms from the neighboring yards. I stepped back slowly, feeling the fine gravel shift beneath my boots, each tiny crunch a reminder of the controlled environment I had cultivated. Patty Caldwell adjusted the rearview mirror, her reflection catching the sun in a way that made her expression hard to read, and I noticed the subtle tension in her shoulders, the slight pause in her movement as though she sensed that today was different. I ran my eyes over the driveway, memorizing every small incline and dip, noting the way the sun reflected off the Camaro's hood and how the shadows of the maple trees played across the polished surfaces. Inside the garage, the faint hum of the refrigerator mixed with the lingering scent of motor oil, a comforting background to the symphony of observation unfolding outside. I flexed my fingers against the cool metal of the Camaro's fender, recalling the meticulous sanding and priming that had taken place over countless evenings, the hours of attention transforming rust and dents into flawless reflection. The neighborhood was alive with quiet sounds, a distant lawn mower, a bird calling from the top of the oak, the soft rattle of a newspaper landing on a porch, each note feeding into the rhythm I had internalized, allowing me to anticipate the smallest shifts in Patty's behavior. She moved closer, the tires of her SUV pressing into the gravel with a subtle crunch, and I could see the careful calculation in the way she maneuvered, the faint gleam of determination in her eyes behind reflective lenses. I tilted my head slightly, assessing angles and distances, noting the trajectory of her vehicle, the alignment of her wheels with the edge of the Camaro, the tiny vibrations through the ground that gave away the power of her engine. My breath slowed, matching the cadence of the quiet morning, and I allowed my senses to absorb every detail, from the glint of the sun on chrome to the shifting shadows across the driveway. Every movement, every sound, and every scent was catalogued mentally, a map of anticipation and preparation forming as I considered how to leverage the environment, timing, and subtle physics to my advantage. Patty paused, checking her surroundings, her posture rigid, as if sensing my attention, and I felt the calm awareness of someone who had observed and recorded every prior action, every minor adjustment, every repeated pattern. I shifted slightly, the gravel underfoot settling, the Camaro reflecting the morning light in a way that emphasized every detail of previous scratches and imperfections, turning them into markers for strategy. The soft hum of wind through the trees carried the scent of damp earth and fresh grass, and I imagined the sequence of events that would unfold, the interplay of observation, patience, and precise action that I had been preparing for, knowing that the outcome depended on every nuanced cue, every carefully measured response, and the quiet authority of someone fully in control of their space, their timing, and their environment, ready to transform observation into calculated action in the ongoing rhythm of suburban life. I stepped back into the garage, the faint scent of motor oil and metal filing still lingering in the air, a subtle reminder of the meticulous work I had poured into restoring the Camaro. Every tool was in its place, wrenches lined up like soldiers ready for inspection, sockets nested in their compartments, and the hum of the refrigerator mixing with the quiet ticking of the clock on the wall created a steady rhythm that grounded me in preparation. I examined the driveway from the threshold, noting the shifts in sunlight and shadow across the gravel, the slight incline where the tires of the SUV would react differently, and the way the polished surface of the Camaro reflected the patterns of the oak trees overhead. Patty Caldwell had a routine, predictable in the subtle cues of her approach, the angle of her vehicle, the speed at which she maneuvered, and I had studied it carefully, mapping each movement in my mind like a chessboard waiting for the right play. I ran my hands over the hood of the car, feeling the cool metal beneath my fingers, each ridge and contour a reminder of the hours spent sanding, priming, and polishing to perfection. Outside, the neighborhood was settling into its early morning rhythm, the faint hum of a distant lawn mower, the chirp of birds, the rustle of leaves in the wind all blended into a subtle soundtrack that allowed me to anticipate every auditory cue. I noticed the subtle shifts in the gravel as a neighbor's cat wandered through the yard, the gentle sway of the oak branches catching sunlight, and the glint off the chrome on the front bumper, each reflection a detail I could leverage. Patty stepped forward again, her SUV moving with careful precision, and I noted the alignment of the wheels with the edge of the driveway, the micro-adjustments she made, and the slight tension in her posture as if sensing my presence. I crouched slightly, allowing my eyes to catch the reflections in the side mirrors, the angle of the sun on the hood, and the minute vibrations traveling through the ground, all feeding into the calculation of the environment. The smell of fresh-cut grass mixed with the faint tang of gasoline, anchoring me in the sensory reality of the moment, while I mentally ran through the sequence I had prepared, each step rehearsed and internalized. I felt the steady warmth of the sun on my back, the faint vibration of the tools in the garage reminding me of precision and control, and the subtle shift of the air as Patty's tires pressed into the gravel, marking her approach. Every detail mattered, the sound of tires, the angle of sunlight, the glint of chrome, the pattern of shadows, and the small incline of the driveway. I adjusted my stance slightly, feeling the gravel settle under my boots, my hands steady, and the anticipation building not through sudden motion but through measured observation, knowing that every moment of attention, every carefully noted detail, and every subtle cue would contribute to the timing and effectiveness of the plan I had meticulously prepared. The environment, the materials, and the rhythms of the morning had been catalogued and aligned with my actions, ready to transform observation and preparation into a precise and deliberate outcome, ensuring that every cue from Patty's movements would feed into the response I had been constructing in the quiet, methodical hours leading up to this moment. The moment had come, the culmination of hours of observation, planning, and quiet preparation. I stepped to the edge of the driveway, feeling the warm sun on my back and the subtle vibrations of the gravel beneath my boots, each tiny movement sending signals through the ground that I had memorized and used to anticipate every possible angle of approach. Patty Caldwell adjusted her sunglasses again, a habitual gesture that gave away the small rhythm of her attention, and I noted the slight shift in her posture as she moved closer, her white SUV inching forward with a mechanical hum. I had positioned everything deliberately, the subtle incline of the driveway, the alignment of the Camaro, the spacing of the gravel, and the reflective surfaces to catch the light in ways that highlighted every micro-movement. I flexed my fingers, feeling the cool metal of the hood, the warmth from the sun, and the subtle vibrations from the nearby tools in the garage, integrating each sense into a mental map of precision. As Patty nudged the edge of the Camaro once more, I observed her focus tighten, the small micro-adjustments in her grip on the steering wheel, the way her foot shifted slightly on the accelerator, and I knew she was repeating a pattern she did not fully understand I had catalogued. I took a controlled step forward, aligning myself with the trajectory she had established, and imagined the chain of consequences that would unfold, each element falling into place according to the plan I had rehearsed mentally over countless mornings. The air carried the mixed scents of motor oil, freshly cut grass, and warm asphalt, mingling in a sensory web that anchored me in the physical space and the timing of the moment. I watched the sunlight glint across the Camaro, highlighting every scratch, every polished contour, and using those reflections to anticipate and enhance the visual cues that would inform my next actions. Patty paused for a brief second, her eyes flicking to the subtle shadow patterns on the gravel, and I recognized the hesitation that indicated she had reached the limit of her understanding of the situation. I moved deliberately, my steps quiet but confident, feeling the texture of the gravel underfoot, the warmth of the sun, and the alignment of the Camaro as a reference point, and allowed the plan to unfold naturally. The sequence I had prepared transformed each environmental cue, each micro-movement of Patty's SUV, into signals that guided my responses with precision. The driveway, the car, and the positioning of the vehicles became a dynamic system in which every detail had meaning, and the outcome was determined by the meticulous orchestration of observation and timing. I could see the subtle shift in Patty's expression, the tightening of her grip, the faint hesitation in her movement as the carefully planned consequences began to manifest, and I felt the satisfaction of a strategy executed with patience, intelligence, and the full engagement of senses honed over months of careful preparation. The calm rhythm of the neighborhood morning, birds, distant cars, the hum of a lawn mower, blended seamlessly with the tactile, visual, and auditory cues of the driveway, creating a moment where anticipation, awareness, and preparation coalesced into a controlled, deliberate, and undeniable payoff. The sequence unfolded with an almost cinematic precision. The Camaro stood polished and gleaming, catching every slant of morning light and reflecting the carefully landscaped surroundings of Willow Creek Lane. Patty Caldwell's SUV had halted, the subtle vibrations of her tires on gravel fading as the anticipation of the moment became tangible in the air. I could see the exact shift in her posture, the tiny lean forward of her body, the careful placement of her hands on the steering wheel, each micro-adjustment betraying the patterns I had meticulously catalogued over weeks. The faint scent of motor oil and asphalt mixed with the warm morning air, grounding me in the sensory environment I had mastered, and the gentle rustle of leaves in the oak tree overhead added a rhythmic backdrop to the unfolding scene. I stepped deliberately, the gravel shifting under my boots in a way I had memorized, aligning myself with the trajectory I had anticipated, and I allowed the environment to dictate the flow, using every reflection, shadow, and subtle vibration to inform my next moves. The sunlight glinted off the polished chrome of the Camaro, emphasizing every contour and reflecting patterns onto the driveway, creating visual markers that guided my positioning and timing. Patty's subtle hesitation became apparent in the way her foot hovered slightly above the accelerator, the slight tightening of her grip on the wheel, and the way her eyes scanned the driveway, trying to predict my next action. Each movement she made fed directly into the plan I had crafted, turning her confidence into predictable cues that I could leverage. The neighborhood sounds, the distant hum of a lawn mower, the soft bark of a dog, the faint rumble of a passing car, blended seamlessly with the more immediate sensory details of gravel under tires, the shimmer of sunlight on metal, and the scent of fresh grass, creating a precise mental map that I used to execute the strategy. I shifted my stance, allowing the morning light to guide my observation, feeling the subtle changes in the gravel and the vibration through the ground as indicators of position and alignment, and the Camaro became a fixed point of reference against which every movement could be measured. Patty's SUV moved once more, just slightly, and I could see her subtle micro-corrections, the way her body adjusted to maintain balance and control, the slight pause in her motion betraying the recognition that her prior confidence was no longer sufficient. I held my breath, attuning to the subtle rhythm of her approach, the tension in the air, the heat of the sun on my back, and the blend of scents and sounds that defined the driveway. Every detail, from reflections in chrome to the minute vibrations underfoot, became a cue, each one feeding into the next step of the plan. And then, the subtle shift in position, the careful alignment, the almost imperceptible cue from the light on the hood of the Camaro, triggered the culmination I had been anticipating, a seamless transition from observation to calculated response, turning hours of preparation into a tangible, undeniable payoff where the environment, timing, and attention to detail combined to demonstrate control, strategy, and measured execution in the quiet choreography of suburban life. The morning light had fully settled across Willow Creek Lane, illuminating the driveway, the polished surface of the Camaro, and the subtle sheen on Patty Caldwell's SUV as the scene reached its quiet resolution. I could hear the distant sounds of the neighborhood finally settling into its routine, a lawn mower humming at a neighbor's house, the soft murmur of a car passing by, the occasional chirp of a bird from the oak tree at the corner, and the faint rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. The air carried the mixed scents of fresh asphalt, cut grass, and the residual tang of motor oil from the garage, grounding me in the sensory environment that had defined the last several hours. Patty remained by her vehicle, momentarily frozen, her usual confidence replaced by the subtle acknowledgement of the pattern she had failed to anticipate, the rhythm of her movements disrupted by the careful orchestration of observation and timing. I stepped closer to the Camaro, feeling the warmth of the metal through my gloves, the smooth curves reflecting the sunlight and serving as a tangible marker of the patience and meticulous care that had gone into restoring it. Every bolt, every polished panel, every minute detail was a record of precision and determination, and in that moment, it was not just a car but a symbol of the calculated approach that had transformed anticipation into outcome. I inhaled slowly, taking in the scents and sounds, the gentle warmth of the sun on my shoulders, the subtle vibrations through the gravel beneath my boots, and the interplay of shadow and light across the driveway, all of which reinforced the reality that preparation and attention to detail had led to a decisive, undeniable conclusion. Patty adjusted slightly, a soft shift in posture that spoke of realization, and I noted it with a quiet satisfaction, the subtle confirmation that her expectations had been appended without confrontation or escalation. The neighborhood remained calm, the hum of daily activity continuing as if oblivious to the precise choreography that had just concluded in my driveway, and I allowed myself a measured moment to appreciate the intersection of environment, observation, and patient strategy. I stepped fully into the sunlight, the Camaro gleaming beside me, each reflection a testament to the careful balance of anticipation and execution, and I could feel the subtle cadence of my own breathing, the calm after the focused intensity, knowing that the sequence had unfolded exactly as planned. Every element, from the precise alignment of the vehicles to the soft ambient sounds, to the gentle interplay of shadows, had contributed to a result that was controlled, deliberate, and undeniable, demonstrating that patience, preparation, and careful attention to detail could produce a resolution that was both satisfying and complete. As I walked slowly around the Camaro, the metal warm under my hands, the driveway quiet except for the distant rhythm of the neighborhood, I understood that the events of the morning had not just concluded a conflict but had reinforced the principle that thoughtful observation and measured action created outcomes where control, precision, and intelligence determined the result, leaving a sense of quiet authority and inevitable satisfaction in the air.